Hi, I'm Dr. Edward A. Addison here, and welcome back to Leadership Matters. Happy New Year to you, first and foremost, where we discuss leadership matters because leadership does matter. This is our very first program of 2023, and what a wonderful event we have in store for you tonight. It's good to be back with you. I hope the year has got off to a great start for you. Thank you for tuning in tonight. It's not possible without your faithful participation. Before we press ahead tonight, could you kindly take the opportunity to share, copy, and paste the link, tag your friends and family, share on all your platforms, and be a blessing to someone? Tonight's topic, as always, promises to be impactful. My guests are no strangers to this particular program. It's always good to have them join us on this particular program. It's been a whole year since we had them on last, and they're joining us from various regions around the world today. And so we're going to bring them on to join us. I have Rolake Akinkugbe-Fulani all the way from Nigeria. She'll be joining us. We also have Dr. Sam Ekundayo in New Zealand and Dr. Osagie in the USA. Welcome back to Leadership Matters. I tell you, it's always an honor to have this cohort on. I've been following your progress online. I'm a secret fan, sneaking on your Instagrams and on your Facebook, seeing what's happening in your life over the years. It would be great to hear from you. Speak to the audience and tell us what's been happening in your life first and foremost over the last 1 year. Dr. Sam Ekundayo, thank you so much. I know it is I don't want to call it an inconvenience because you're serving God, but for you to come on at such a time in the morning, we are truly honored and blessed, and we don't take it lightly, whatever the case is. So it's good to have you, and Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you too, Dr. Addison. It's a joy and a privilege to be live on Leadership Matters once again with the people I love, Dr. EC, Rolake, and yourself. It's been a minute, but things have been going well. Happy New Year to everyone. It's a joy to be here. Yes, ever since the last time we were here, a lot has happened. And we give God all the glory. Of course, I guess through the course of the program, we'll be talking about some of those exciting things that that have happened.
Great. And Dr. Osagie, I know, what time is it over there in the USA?
It's 12:30. It's 12:30 Central Time. 12:37.
Well, it's not too bad. I'm sure you were way before this. You were way before this program got started.
Yes. So we appreciate Dr. Sam's sacrifice. First, can I apologize first? Can I start with an apology? I want to apologize for missing the second edition with this same cohort. I watched it and I knew that I wasn't missed at all. So I don't know why I'm apologizing. I wasn't missed at all. It was so much better. The latter was, as usual, better than the former. So I apologize for missing that. But I made up my mind that I was not going to miss this regardless of the circumstances. So I'm glad to be back with you, Dr. Sam, Dr. Edward, and the irrepressible Rolake Akinkugbe-Fulani as well, when she joins us. So I'm looking forward to this. We've had a great year, 2022. A lot of things have happened. Happy New Year to you too. Joy, I should say. Sorry, I missed that. Yeah. So Happy New Year to everyone. I'm privileged to be in such esteemed company.
It's good. And just to let the audience know, Rolake is joining us. She's coming back online. She was online a few minutes ago. Keep sending us your comments. Let us know where you're watching from. And this promises to be an incredible cohort today. It's one of my favorite cohorts, and without any doubt. And so tonight, we're going to add Rolake here. Yes, I think she's here behind, and I think the team can add to her and the comments. So we'll get started, but I wanted her to introduce her for a few minutes as Rolake comes on. Hey, Rolake, how are you? Happy New Year to you. It's great to
Hello.
see you.
Nice to see
Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year, Rolake. Great to see you. You look great.
Good. Thank you. So good to be reunited with you all.
Likewise.
Yeah,
Likewise.
we were just talking about the fact that we hadn't had you on for a year, and perhaps it'd be great to share a little bit of what's happening in your life. I know you're a media mogul now on TV, on TV or a particular program, and I'm really proud of that. So just share a little bit of what's happened in your life over the last year.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Edward. And good to see you again, Dr. Ekundayo and Dr. Osagie. I still haven't had my doctor title added, so that PhD is still elusive.
Listen, may I
But
say, the
yes.
guys, I'm going to interrupt because Dr. Sam and Dr. Osagie were gracious enough to say they were going to take their titles off today to make you feel absolutely comfortable.
I'm comfortable in any room. It's fine. Thank you. I appreciate it. So, well, yes, I've expanded my horizons, if you like. I'm still a corporate executive, but one of the things that over the years I've become much more confident about doing is really just making the most of my gifts and my talents. And, having known for a while that I've done very well with TV and media in the past, appearing as a subject matter expert. It was perfect timing, perfect alignment when I was approached by a major news channel here, having appeared on their program as a subject matter expert on infrastructure. And the chairman said, would you consider coming on as a weekly anchor once a week? We'll create your own program for you. You're really good with the business stuff, having conversations. And it was sort of the opportunity I'd been waiting for. And yes, I launched into it and it's been absolutely fantastic. And of course, everybody's saying, are you sure you don't want to do this full time? But it's been really, really satisfying, super grateful to have this opportunity to essentially be living a full life in a sense, and hopefully using that platform as a way to achieve more impact in my chosen field.
Wow, that's wonderful, and that's great to hear. And so, well, let's delve into the discussion tonight. I think the subject matter is the mindset of a leader, thinking and growing as a leader. But it's not just about organizational leadership here. We're thinking about leading yourself, your personal growth. A big part of what we think about at the beginning of the year is a leader's mindset. May I say, I think one of the things I enjoy about leadership, and I think both Dr. Ekundayo and Rolake, Sam and Rolake mentioned this in their clips, was that it provides us with the opportunity for continuous stimulus and stimulation in our thinking. There's no end to growing as leaders. You don't get to a particular stage and say, that's it, I've got to the end, I've grown, I've achieved, and I've arrived, if we might use that term there. And so the whole idea behind today's subject is to explore that whole concept of the continuous growth of a mindset of a leader and growing as a leader in that sense. So the first question I want to ask, and I think it may sound trite in itself, but it's worth us looking at it again because of the subject matter. And I continuously think about this question, and I revise and rethink how I answer it based on continuous reflection. And it's this simple question: are successful leaders, and the thing here is successful leaders, are they born, or are successful leaders made? Is there an argument that most successful people are born with the genetic code to become successful, if we might use that? Do they possess the sort of, the French would say, the je ne sais quoi? I do not know what it is, but they have it, sort of thing. So that's the first question. I'm going to throw that to Rolake first.
Wow, that's a big question. Great way to enter this discussion. And just to pick up on the French code, je ne sais quoi, I think of it as a sort of presence. I used to describe when you see a great leader, somebody you call a great leader, when they enter a room or they come into a space, you don't quite know what is it about them that makes them really compelling, but you just know when you see it, right? So in a sense, my answer to that question is both. I know that's a bit controversial, because I think leadership is both about your passion, so what makes you you and what drives you, but it's also about your ability, your competence, and the stuff that is competence can be acquired. But I think you have to have some sort of intrinsic drive to want to do the work. So from that perspective, I think there's an element of the ingredients of leadership that has to be intrinsic. But what is the acquisition part of it is that that drive can manifest in different ways depending on who you are, how you learn, how you absorb knowledge and information. So my answer to that question is both, because we all have the capacity to be great leaders because there's an intrinsic driving all of us. We're searching and yearning for something. But then the manifestation of that will depend on how much we harness our skills and our abilities and how much we apply ourselves. And that is nurture as well, and how much we open up ourselves to external stimuli or learning.
I think that's great. And the question, you hit on something there, because the question always is one of nature versus nurture in that situation. So, Sam, would you want to add to that?
Yes, sir. And Rolake has given a spot on answer. I believe very strongly that it is both as well. It is one thing to be born something, it's another thing to become that thing. So I often believe that the gap in leadership is the becoming of the leader that we're born to be. So everyone was born a leader. Every human being has the leadership potential inside of them. In other words, there is a culmination to who we'll become. However, whether we become it is up to us. It's not up to our creator. And that is the gap that I believe, this sort of discussion does address, in helping you harness that leadership potential inside of you and helping you, navigate how to actually close that gap and become that leader that you're created to be. So a leader is both born and made, but that potential has to be harnessed by the very leader, him or herself.
I'm going to ask Issy that question. Then there's something about what we say about that je ne sais quoi that Rolake mentions. I want to double back on. It just hit me. So remind me, Rolake. Issy.
Let me piggyback on that. Actually, when you talk about je ne sais quoi, you're talking about presence. There's some people that come into a room and you feel this sense of authority that they carry. They just carry a sense of presence. Now, when I was less experienced when I was a little bit younger, I would say I found that impressive. But over time, what I found is a lot of people could have presence but no content. So you see people come in with presence, and the worst thing they could do is speak. Because at that moment in time, you might have grave assumptions about their intellect, authority, knowledge, and all of that. But you find out that when they start to speak, there's nothing to that presence. It's false bravado. And oftentimes you go into rooms and meeting rooms and you will see people, the shy, especially because of my technical background, you see the shy lady sitting at the corner. But what you observe in that meeting, you find out that decisions are not made until they hear from her. That's the real presence. That's real leadership. Until her input is heard in a matter, no decision is made by the CEO. He has recognized that it's not the deepest, biggest voice and the tallest person. So I have a problem. So to answer your question, I would believe, I agree with the nuance, but I would tilt more that leaders are made, and I'll explain why I say so. Every one of us, there's something that came out earlier on from theologians where they say, I know you've heard the term, Pastor, Imago Dei, where we are
Yeah.
all made in the image of
Image
God.
of
So
God.
there's a godlike quality in every single one of us. So there is that leadership potential in every single one of us. Now, from that potential to become reality, you need to understand, first of all, what is leadership? Leadership means people are willing to follow you on a matter. So for me to be able to follow you on the matter requires competence. Competence is not given by birth. Gifts may be given to aid your competence, but that competence requires fine-tuning and development significantly and continuously. The growth mindset in me will always say that I will tilt further to it is learned and not birthed. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay. I have this thing when I think about it, I say, when people ask about it in relation to leaders, I usually say, so why don't we ask that question about pilots? Are they born or are they made? Or
That's a good one.
you
That's
get
a
a
good
point.
one.
Or medical doctors, are they born or are they made? Yeah. And then I go on and say that I've never seen a medical doctor that's never been born first, or a pilot that's never been born first. But yet, when it's all said and done, there's a process that takes place
Yeah.
that goes on to make them made. But I'm interested in that je ne sais quoi because it is an important thing. Because, like, it's absolutely true. There are certain people that walk into a room and you know there is something about them and it all exudes leadership or that sort of thing. And the question is, what is it? I mean, the French, I'm learning French. So before I just used to say je ne sais quoi, but it literally means I do not know. The say is no, I. So it means I don't know what that quality is, but it is. So I'm trying to ask, when we think about it, is there something we can say? Is there anything you can put your hand on that creates that, or that is in it, that says that you turn your head a second time and you know this person is a person of influence, this person is a leader in some way or the other? Is there something they've done, or is it just bestowed upon? It comes back to the same question.
Well, in the faith context, some people might say you're carrying an anointing. So
Mm,
there's just something about you. But usually what you find, and I'll just touch on the faith context, is when you've been waiting or been in the presence of God and you come out, reminds me of Moses. He went up into the
yeah.
mountain and he came down, and the glory was just all over him. It was a lot, it was overwhelming. So, but even that required some sort of responsibility, right? So it's not an anointing that functions in the absence of you committing to doing something or sacrificing something. So you
Mm,
spend time in the presence of God to carry
mm,
that. If I bring it to sort of the corporate world, the secular context, I think presence, funny enough, is actually something I teach, because even presence is something that you can build, because
mm,
it goes into how you communicate with people. What is the language of
mm,
your communication? I recently did a short article on leadership language.
mm,
And one of the things we looked at is your language always focused on solutions? What sort of words, or what is your initial reaction to things? There are a lot of charismatic people who are not leadership quality,
mm,
because often you need that initial presence, a charisma, to draw people in some context. And I do agree with Dr. Isi to a certain extent, in the sense that we have to be careful so that we don't just use the appearance. And I'll give you a very classic example in the Bible: the anointing of David in the house of Jesse, right? They'd been through all these sons, all of them. And here was this shepherd boy in the back whose father had even forgotten, the
mm,
effrontery, his father had forgotten that he was there. And he was just a shepherd, a lowly shepherd. And Samuel was like, surely, are you sure there isn't one more person? And I think that is where one has to draw the line. But from Samuel's perspective, that required insight. You had to look beyond the
mm,
appearance. So I think presence is a thing, having gravitas, having authority. And you often hear that when people make comments. I've had that said to me: oh, you carry gravitas, there's something about you.
yeah.
But the reality is, you have to also do a certain amount of work. Your
Mm,
competence is important, building your substance, actually bringing a contribution to the table. So presence still has to be cultivated. It has to do with language. It has to do with empathy. It has to do with emotional intelligence. When you're in the presence of people, how do you make them feel?
Yeah.
And if that is done consistently over time, then people gravitate towards you. And it's possible for people to gravitate towards you initially, but lose interest because there isn't substance. You can't retain their attention, and they didn't see you as somebody who they can follow. So je ne sais quoi is important, but in the long term, you're going to require much more.
All right, great. And so I've got to throw this to Sam here.
Please, can I just add to that, Doc?
Yeah, the question is going to enable you to address that also, because it says in a way what truly separates leaders from followers then, because are we and I know you're all confident within yourself, and the whole idea of us extending this discussion where we're able to banter things and agree and disagree is important to a certain extent, is to say, if someone said, put it this way, he said, if you had 50 lions and one deer, things aren't going to get done. If you have one lion and 50 deers, things are going to get done in the context of all those 50 lions being leaders. And so we need followers as much as we need leaders, is what I'm getting at here. So what separates leaders from followers? And it follows on from that whole je ne sais quoi.
I just want to really commend Rolake for that answer. And just to add to it is the fact that presence is a function of content and context. So it's possible to have presence in a given context, and not to have presence in another context. So presence can be very deceitful in terms of leadership. Just like Rolake did mention, the example of David. David had great presence in the bush, right? As a shepherd. He was the leader of the sheep. Of course, no one was, probably paid attention to what he was doing, but he was doing great work in there, killing lion, killing bear, and all of those things like that, and making sure no sheep was lost in the entire process. But no one really saw the mighty work he was doing in that context, whereas he had great content in that context. And that's why I believe that presence is a function of context and content. I saw something recently about a great musician, classical violinist or something like that, who had disguised, I think somewhere in the UK or in London or something like that, and disguised like a homeless person, took a violin to the train station or something like that. It was actually very popular. It had a great solid brand that thousands of people would come to his show, but he had disguised as a homeless, and no one could recognize him. And he was playing this outstanding, rendition that, people were just walking past, and they were walking past and walking past. No one was paying attention to who he was until he then, reviewed his true identity. All of a sudden, the crowd started gathering, because of that. Yes, even though he had that presence and all, but the context he was playing in or at didn't give did not give so much how do I say this now, recognition exactly for what he carried, for the content inside of him. Until then, he had to reveal himself. Hence, the point I'm trying to make is presence is both a function of context. Where someone like myself would probably function, and and people would say, "Wow, where have you been?" Some other person would get there, and whereas they could be great in another context, will get there, and people will wonder what's going on. Why are you here? You don't belong here, so to speak. So just thought I would add that. But in terms of that question, and leading on to why we need followers, I believe very strongly that all of us are leaders and all of us are followers. Again, it's a question of context as well too. In a context, there's this a picture I love using, but I don't know if I have the permission to share or the right to share. It's the jigsaw puzzle. I believe very strongly that all of us we are like a piece of a puzzle on a jigsaw. And in our place, we are meant to be leaders. Outside of our place, we follow other people because that's their place. And when we recognize that we are never full of ourselves, we simply understand the privilege to lead where we are, and also understand the privilege to follow wherever we are. We're meant to follow. I'll just say that for now, and then let others add to that.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that, because I usually say, for example, if I'm someone could lead me in technology, I'm absolutely woeful in that, and so in that context, I'm following. Or, for example, if I'm on the plane, I mean, for heaven's sake, I'm sure all of us here, particularly, are following when we're on a plane. The person who's providing leadership within that context is the pilot and the crew. So I appreciate it's based on competence, context, as you rightly would say there. Issy, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. I think I love the topic, and I like the way the example Rolake used, using the Bible from David, comparing Saul. Saul was the 6 foot, I presume. Said he was tall, he was fair to look at. David was the ruddy teenager and all of that. But what impresses me most is when Samuel goes to the house of Jesse to pick a king, he looks at Jesse's son and he says, surely it has to be this guy. It has to be this guy. He looks the part. And God didn't say, no, it's not him. He said, I've rejected him. What that implies is that he was considered. You don't get a rejection if you didn't put in an application. So he was considered, but he was rejected. And then you see later when David tries to approach Goliath, the same guy says, who have you left the few sheep with? And then you get the context why God rejected him. David killed a lion and a bear for few sheep. That is the heart of the leader we want, or God wants. He's calling it few sheep, like this is inconsequential to what the main task is at hand. But it's like the Bible says, if you cannot take care of that which is another man's, who will give you yours? So in the context of your question, following on, it's like, who is a follower and who's a leader? When are you a follower and when you're a leader? The qualification for leadership is good followership. That you know how to follow diligently qualifies you to be a leader. One. The second thing is there's the heart of the servant leader. That person that at every given time is able to fight a figurative lion and bear. Hey guys, don't go fight any lion and bear on top of this conversation. A figurative lion and bear for few sheep that belongs to someone else. When you are not even considered, when no one is watching. Amen. That is the real leadership. I want to also piggyback on something you said, Dr. Sam, about that illustration about the musician playing this great rendition. He's playing this great rendition and nobody listens to it because they don't know who it is. That is not the fault. Let me put it this way. Let me rephrase. The rendition had no problem. The problem is us. When God rejected the son of Jesse, he said, I do not view the way you guys view things. My perspective is quite different from us. The problem is we're in a culture, a celebrity culture, where we celebrate people without any accomplishments. So now you see the accomplishment without the celebrity, you can't appreciate it. That's not the artist's fault. It's the viewer's fault, the people listening, that they cannot appreciate good music because they don't know who it is. The same way we will follow something I call the Kardashian spirit, where people have huge followership without any degree of competence. It's absurd and it's insane. The world is turning upside down. The whole point of celebrity was that you could do something that no one else could do. In school, you were famous for going good at sports, being very good in school or at class. Now you're famous for being famous. That's my 1 minute rant. Forgive me.
Now, may I ask, because there's something, a lot of what you guys are saying is very interesting, and I'm enjoying this. When Jesus says to the disciples, he he meets these rough, rugged fishermen who have no qualifications whatsoever, and then he says to them, "Follow me, and I will make you." That process of making, and that whole process is the making of them to become the leaders that are able ultimately to turn the world upside down. And so the question I have here is in us following Christ, we're thinking of how did this whole process of working out to people who are fishermen to ultimately become leaders, how does that relate to us in our mindset and the transformation Christ is able to do in our lives as followers to ultimately become the leaders he has called us to be? Rolake?
Okay, that is a very deep question.
Yeah.
I will try to do justice to it. I think one of the things, thinking through it, I'm just sort of thinking on the spot here. I think Christ gave them significance.
Mm,
Um, and so, in some way, I think they had willing and open hearts. Um, in some ways, because of the type of work they do now, if you're a fisherman in that context, I imagine that socially, your status in society, you're probably not part of the sort of theological elite or people who
mm,
are the erudite scholars of your time. You are ordinary fishermen going about their day-to-day duty. I wouldn't say maybe bottom of the pyramid economically, but probably, so
you're
almost like
right.
a peasant farmer, right? And so in some ways, you come from a posture where perhaps your heart is sold out, because you have a certain level of contentment. You're not possibly looking for significance. You're already in a context that's probably quite limited. But what you do have is an open heart. And so you have this sort of external factor, and I'm just using this as an analogy that comes to you and says, I will give you significance, and I will make you. Right. Now, Jesus himself, as a leader, must have carried something. At that point, they probably didn't know the full extent of what his life would become, what his ministry would become. Um, we know in hindsight what the journey of the disciples unfolded like. But at the
Mm,
point someone comes to you day to day going about your business and just says to you, follow me and I'll make you I'll make you fishers of men, that split second decision was life changing. And
mm,
so the question for me is, why did they decide to follow?
mm,
Um, People will say there's some blanks that we're left to filling in the Bible and we don't really know.
mm,
But I would say, I think the Son of God carried something, right? He must have carried something, number one. Number
mm,
two is they had hearts willing and open. There must have been a certain part of them is, it can't get any worse than this. And I'm not saying they necessarily had a bad existence, but these
mm,
people who had a natural posture of surrender, they weren't perfect people. For you to have then just decided, you know what, okay, I'm going to get up and go, without really knowing the role ahead. So, from a leadership perspective, I think, and they would eventually become preachers and apostles and all of that. They had a strong servant heart. They had a willingness to learn. They were open. And actually, the journey of leadership, as we've all said, starts from the most minute place. If I look at my own life, and the various roles I played, let me give the example of the church. Ended up becoming music director at my church in the UK. When I tell people that in the early days, the hours that I would put into coming to rehearsal, staying faithful, staying consistent, doing mundane tasks that
mm,
you're kind of, when I look at it back now, that was all
mm.
breeding ground.
Yeah.
So whether consciously or unconsciously I knew it or not, I had a posture that was somewhat already sold out to Christ and sold out to the journey.
Mm,
And so by the time my character was being built, and now you're in a leadership position, it was almost like you had been tried and tested and proved
mm,
Mm.
able and capable. I don't want to use the word worthy because it's not about
yeah.
arrogance, but we know that it's Christ that appoints.
Yeah.
And so there was a journey that began from a place of surrender and sacrifice, that led to that. I hope I've sort of answered
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. I want to take that forward. Does anyone else want to add to that?
Thank you, Rolake. I think that's a very and thank you, Dr. Addison, as well. I think that's a very powerful answer. The truth is this: every single follower, or a genuine follower, a true follower, must have the willingness to be carried, must have the willingness to be made. Yeah, but I also agree with Rolake that the the beckoning of Jesus was based on what he knew about them before. So he had seen their potential. So, in other words, they were chosen because of their potential, because of what he had seen, what he knew about them, of course. The Son of God, he carried authority. But because the very essence of leadership is influence, theologians have told us that Andrew and Simon Peter had encountered Jesus before. He actually told them to before making that statement, follow me. So at the first encounter of Jesus, they must have seen the authority, the influence. So when someone says, "I will make you," the it takes a lot of faith and belief to believe that that person could actually make you. And it speaks to the potential of who you are as well, that you could be made into something. So I just thought I would touch on that. So the authority of the maker and then the potential of the person being made, both of them being married, is what birthed that life-changing, historical moment of follow me and I will make you.
Okay, let's move this ahead a bit, Lee. Now, I want to ask Izzy this question. I always say leaders are paid to, if we're thinking about being paid or whatever, to think and solve problems. And workers, or followers in many instances, are paid to do tasks and functions. If you get to a particular level of management and leadership, the key issues are about strategy, organizational development, developing others in that situation. We're thinking about the mindset of a leader. What is the process of a person that ultimately becomes a problem solver within the context of leadership? How does a person move from that place of where they're let me put this within this context. I think this will help us unravel it a little bit more. I always think of Joseph, and I say when Joseph was in prison, obviously he helped solve problems with the gifts God had given him. But then he comes before Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says, "Oh, can you interpret this dream?" That's all he wanted, was an interpretation to the dream. And but he gives him the interpretation to the dream, but he goes further than just the interpretation. He says, "Listen, this is what you need to do. You need to have a immediate action plan, which is get yourself a man, an intermediate plan, 7 years of gathering, then a long-term strategy where you're able to dispense." And I always say, if he had just given an interpretation to the dream, Pharaoh would have said, "Oh, well, why are you in prison for?" So, "Well, I did nothing wrong." So, "Oh, what do you want?" "Oh, well, I'll send you back home." That would have been the end. But what really got him the job, if we're talking about him getting the job, was he became a problem solver. And so we're thinking about the mindset of the leader. And I know in all of your lives, in many ways, and I like some practical examples, especially for the people who are listening and will listen to this program, about how you cultivated and became someone who your whole life became about solving problems. Uneasy lies the head that wears the crown. And I know what it is to get to that place where your whole life is about solving problems. And that's part of what it takes to be a leader. Issy.
Yeah. How many minutes do we have?
Three.
Because I could go for an hour on this. Yeah, because you touched on so many things. You touched on so many things. You talked on the process. You touched on, recognizing. So one of the things I want to point out first, leaders solve problems, but this is why I believe everyone is a leader. Because, yeah, Joseph created the strategy. He needed people to do the implementation. There's a great management mind that I follow. He says, when they say things like Steve Jobs made the iPhone, and he'll be like, so only Steve Jobs? Did he do it all by himself? Did he solder all the things? Do you get what I mean? Henry Midsberg, if anybody's looking, you go look him up. I really love his mindset. He's kind of opposed to leadership and more focused on management, but I get what his point is. I want to rephrase that and say leaders do not just solve problems, because everybody does in their own cadence, and that's why we're all leaders. But the leader, in terms of the position, what he does is it defines strategy and influences implementation. So a leader defines strategy, vision, where are we going, culture, all of those things. Then he influences implementation. How does he implement? How does he influence implementation? A leader has to be a seller. You sell your ideas every day. I do it even from home. I have to sell my daughter's 10-year-old on the reason why she needs to eat her lunch and all those reasons. I have to sell it in order for her to be willing to do it. And how you sell and implement those things is the key. And I look at it three ways. One, the leader sees, he makes the follower see. He makes the follower think differently, see differently, think differently, then ultimately do differently. So it's the seeing, the thinking, the doing. You can force people to do things with authority and power, but you can't influence people to do things differently if they aren't seeing it first differently and thinking about it differently. Now, going to Joseph, what Joseph did, and I think everyone should do it, and it's really, really key that you pointed this out. He didn't just solve a problem, he recognized what I call the vacuum of leadership. He recognized, if, for example, let's use practical terms, in my company, I want to be the head of sales, so I want to be the head of marketing. There is someone there right now that is already the head of marketing. That puts me automatically in an adversarial position with that person. However, if I'm able to identify the intersection between marketing, sales, and engineering, I have created a new position for myself. Now I'm not only an ally to the head of marketing, I'm an ally to the head of sales, and I'm allied to the head of engineering. And I found the white space in leadership where I can come in and I'm an ally to everyone and I have the support of everyone. Joseph did not take anyone's position in Egypt. They created a new position, and he created the first fiscal policy that's ever known to man, that's recorded, because he not only identified the problem, and this is the difference between followers and leaders. If you check online now, the biggest platforms on YouTube, Facebook, all the biggest platforms are people who can criticize. Critics. Because you just need to have a clip of your picture, watching other videos and criticizing. That's a follower. So it's the decision maker versus the follower. The decision maker initiates action. The critic criticizes someone else's response. The difference is one has to live with the consequences. The other doesn't have to live with the consequences of what they say.
Absolutely.
So that is the leadership mindset. I don't know if I've explained that or I've gone overboard.
Actually, thank you very much. And I think Rolake and Samuel will build on this. The next question actually was going to be in relation to that problem solving, and what is the process of developing a strategy for solving for problems. So since you've touched on it already, I'm going to throw that into the mix of what we're discussing already. So I think Issy's done a great job in leading us forward there. So the next question was going to be, what is the process? You deal with strategy on a day-to-day basis in your job. And, you know, when we think of a mindset of a leader, part of that is solving problems. Then it's developing the strategy for those problems. And I want us to remember that the people out there are listening to us on a day-by-day basis who are thinking about 2023 and are thinking, I want to respond differently in my business. I want to respond differently in my job. I want to get promoted to the next level. And so I want us to put that in consideration as we're answering this. And Samuel.
Thank you. So first of all, thanks, Dr. AC. That's a very powerful response, and has indeed led us forward. First of all, I must say that a leader does not solve all problems.
Mm.
Because this is so important. Because someone could be listening to us and going, "Oh, is it just about solving a problem? Okay, let's just let's just find any problem around us." I love the words of Pastor Darius Daniel, and he said that what makes a leader is looking for that unique discontentment, something that you are personally sort of aggrieved by, concerned, by, that is very personal to you. That is the problem that you're called to solve. I always say leadership is a calling that is heralded by a unique discontentment, a problem that you have discovered that is very personal to you. And when you find that problem, it's more like you find your calling, you find your leadership calling. Then you're not going all about, just trying to become a leader, but that problem in itself is your invitation into leadership. And that problem itself then arouses, all right, the conviction that you must have already have about who you are, your potential, your talents, your gifts, and then through that you then capture a vision. So going back to that process. So let me say the process first starts before the discovery of the problem. So a leader discovers themselves first before they discover a problem. Otherwise, the problem will ruin will ruin the person. But when you've discovered yourself first, going back to the example of David, he had discovered himself in the bush. All right. Going back to the example of Joseph, Joseph had discovered himself in the pit, discovered himself, in various areas, Potiphar's house and so on and so forth. And then when the main problem came, which is the invitation to what he had on his inside, all right, to then be that leader and show up and then influence other people to follow his vision, he was ready. But too many times what happens is people want to like swing that process and want to just start influencing people without first of all discovering who they are in the secret place. I always say that greatness is doing publicly what you've always done well in private. And that's what really makes you a person of influence. People follow you and they look at you and they realize, oh, wow, you're actually good at that, even though they've never actually seen you do it, but you must have been doing it so excellently in private that when you then show up in public responding to that call, people then realize that, oh wow, you are actually worth following. So just to wrap that up, I believe very strongly that problems are the invitation to leadership. However, there is that process before that main problem or that crisis. I like to use the word crisis, by the way. That crisis then come, and then you show up as the leader or as that person of influence.
Great. Rolake, do you want to chip in on that?
Yeah, I'm just listening intensely because this is always such a masterclass for even me as a participant. I got really drawn in there with Dr. AC and Dr. Sam, kind of using the conversation as a kind of mirror on my own leadership. Um, so I think maybe a couple of responses. The part around I think it was Dr. Sam that said, a leadership doesn't solve problems, but I guess part of the mindset of a leader is to create an environment that allows people to also solve those problems. So one of the things we often talk about with leadership is inspiration and motivation. And so, we're never as leaders necessarily the smartest people in the room. We just have an uncanny ability to identify talent, pull it together, harness it, give it room to grow. And that in itself is inspiration and it's motivation. And I think that's really key. Then the other thing I wanted to say really was around the visioning part that Dr. Issy had talked about and the strategizing. I think some of the greatest leaders I admire today are great visionaries. And they don't necessarily have to be the best executors, because that's where the motivation and inspiration to do comes. But at some point, they will have to role model, right? They will have to roll up their sleeves. And I think that's an important point of leadership. The final point I wanted to make in response was really around, the secret place that Dr. Sam referred to. I think part of what a leadership mindset requires is authenticity. So when people have seen you, as we say in local parlance here, when you've blown,
Yeah.
coming out, and people see you, you're now doing great things, you're now influencing. Part of your responsibility as a leader is to be honest and speak with candor about the journey that it has taken you to get to where you are. So leadership also demands transparency, and vulnerability. So now you see me, I'm this, I'm that, I'm that. There was a secret place. Yes, I did the work. I put in the work, I put in my time, but the journey hasn't always been easy. And I think a leader who can communicate process is really important, because it then, leadership births leadership, and part of your role modeling is authenticity. It then helps people strategize on how they can also become great leaders. And I think the mindset of a leader has to be anchored in the truth of your story and your journey, because that will motivate and inspire people. And it will help eradicate a lot of the mentality we see here, at least in my local context, that somehow people just arrive on the scene. And, and actually, I have a very personal story. I have a very, very personal story. So late last year, I was appointed to the board of WIMBIZ, the board of trustees, and WIMBIZ.
Oh, it's got cut off briefly. We'll get it back in a few minutes. Rolake has gone mute for a moment. As before we get it back, I'm actually in the throes of really reflecting on leadership in the book I'm writing. And one of the things I'm talking about is putting your leadership story front and center of your life as an anchor. And what I call that leadership story is that very first encounter in your life where you had a sense of knowing you were a leader, where you led, where it becomes that anchor in troubled times, in difficult times, in times where you are unsure about your leadership, but you remember that. And it's something for me. I remember I was in secondary school and I was ill. I was at home with malaria in Nigeria, and they were choosing the class captain in my final year. And usually you had to, put yourself forward for it and vote for it and all that sort of thing. And I get back to school a few days later and hear, "Oh, we've voted you as class captain."
In absentia.
Yeah, absolutely in absentia. So it became my leadership story, because it set me on the trajectory of knowing that they saw something in me that I perhaps didn't see in myself. And from then onwards, there was that emboldenment, that there was some sense of a calling to leadership in some way or the other. So why Rolake is coming back, I would like to hear what your leadership story is in relation to that, Samuel and Issy. Rolake is back. It's
Yeah,
good to
Rolake is
see
back.
her.
Yeah.
She's back in a much more elaborate environment.
Hello, we can hear you, Rolake.
Rolake?
Yeah, sorry
That's
about
okay.
that. There was a changeover of electricity. You know how it is locally here.
Yeah.
It's so I was telling the story of my appointment to the board of WIMBIZ late last year, board of trustees, and during the annual conference where this announcement was made, it was a very awkward situation. So after the event, we're networking, and a lady who didn't realize I overheard her talking to a group of another people, and she made a remark, something like, "Where did Rolake suddenly come from?"
Wow.
And it stung, because if you know, apologies, I had to use my phone in the interim. If you know how these things work, you join the organization, you volunteer, you do all those things. And I'd been in the WIMBIS system for about 4 years, and I put in my work. She had been in the system for much longer, fair enough. But, and I don't know whether that comment was laced with a bit of jealousy. I don't know. But it made me think, and I could have got fazed by it. But it made me think that sometimes people don't really see the journey. They don't know the work that has gone in, consciously or subconsciously, to get to where you are. And the context of why somebody is appointed or chosen to lead, which may not be apparent to people in your environment. I hope you can all still hear me.
Yeah,
Yes,
absolutely.
yes.
You're very clear.
And I think that's a really, really important point. And it was a comment that just made me realize, well, I ignored it. And someone even came up to me to apologize apologize on her behalf when they realized that I had heard the comment. And it could have shaken my confidence. But one of the things I realized is that the journey often that leads to something happening will only be apparent to you, may not always be apparent to everybody else. And so when you're leveled with criticism, or when people say, "How did you get there? Why was it you and not somebody else?" It can sting, but you have to be sure in yourself and your abilities and your why in order to thrive in that leadership position. So I thought I would really sort of drive home that point by using that example.
I think that's great. Now we were talking about just while you went offline, we were piggybacking on what you were saying, Rolake, and I was telling them that in the throes of some reflection I'm doing at the moment, I was talking about putting what I call your leadership story front and center at various aspects of one's life. I think she's gone off again. So I'm going to ask Dr. Sam, just to share with us your leadership story, and while you're sharing, I think Rolake will get the sense of what we are talking about.
Yeah. Thank you. I think for me, it was in my high school days in Nigeria. We we call it secondary school, and it was very similar to your story, Dr. Addison. I From nowhere, the fellowship that I was attending, which was the only fellowship in the high school, like the main fellowship, compared to university where you have lots of fellowships. So this was the only fellowship, and I was just attending, of course, serving in one capacity or the other. I can't even remember the exact capacity I was serving. It was certainly not in the choir. It wasn't really on stage. Yeah, so there wasn't really any reference to why I'll be chosen to lead. But there came a time where the leadership team were exiting, and they had to appoint someone else, other leaders rather. And from nowhere, on the day of of that, should we call that coronation or whatever, my name was called out of out of the blue. And I was shocked because no one had warned me in advance or anything. So it was just like the mantle of leadership just fell on me. And I think that was the moment I began paying attention to myself a bit more, to the leadership potential inside of me, to realize, like you mentioned, that it appears I have something inside of me that I may not have noticed, but others do notice. And I would want to correlate that with what may have happened to David as well, when he was suddenly anointed.
Yeah,
Suddenly, no prior warning. Samuel didn't send a message to his father and say, oh, just one. And I'm sure even if he did, David was probably not in that meeting at all. And maybe that was when he began to pay attention. And then every single thing about him that was happening before then and then following on from then began to make sense.
yeah,
All right. Sort of like started confirming, like I said earlier on, that leadership is a calling, started confirming the calling of leadership upon his life. And I always say that, Wayne Dyer said that, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. But I always add that the things you look at would not change, or you would not necessarily change the way you look at things until you change the way you look at yourself. So there is a perspective that comes when you start to look at yourself differently that helps you to see other things differently. And then the things you now see then begins to become different in a way. I hope that doesn't confuse anyone. But what I'm literally saying is that what helps you to see things differently, what changes your perspective and helps you to become a leader that is a visionary, is first of all how you see yourself. And there's got to be something that helps to bring that. And then you start to see things differently, like the Nehemiahs, and the Nelson Mandelas, and while other people will be crying and weeping in crisis, wondering, and become hopeless about their situation. Some encounters that they've had in the past that has sort of like birthed their leadership potential would make them see something differently and create this visionary mindset that there is a solution here, and I can lead people through that solution. I can create this positive change. I can be that leader. I can inspire people to this change. But it starts in the private. Not, Dr. Isid mentioned the celebrity thing. Everyone's trying to become a celebrity and all of that. But if something hadn't happened in private, all right, you would find it very hard to respond to the leadership call that is often heralded by crisis and problem. And this is why those people who are not well cooked in private, when crises come, they always have that victim mentality. They don't rise up to the call because they had not actually developed or discovered who they are, or in private.
great. Thank you so much. We were asking the question, Rolake, about the term I'm working with, which is your leadership story. And I think Dr. Issy will develop that. That very first encounter in life that you had, whether bestowed or you rose up to yourself and realized that this shows there's some bud in life here that suggests I have some leadership potential. And so, Issy, would you like to
Yeah,
give us
yeah,
that
yeah.
story?
Yeah, it's an awkward one for me. Before I start that, let me, there's something a pastor, just piggybacking off what Dr. Sam said. There's a statement that someone that encapsulates what you were saying, that a pastor I know, Pastor Rema, always says. He always says, if your perspective is defective, you can't be effective. Like if
Wow.
the way you see things is not, you're not viewing things from the lens of God, you can't be effective. The prodigal son said, the Bible says, when he came to himself, then he realized, I shouldn't be here. I should go home. When he came to himself. So where was he before? So he was singing wrongly. So he started to view things correctly. I think my story is quite different. I have a similar story to yours. In GSS 1, the teacher asked who wanted to be class captain, and I volunteered. And I wrote this great manifesto. They said you'll bring a pitch and people will vote. And I wrote this great manifesto. I was 10 years old at the time. Wrote this great manifesto and I could speak. I spoke eloquently. I spoke for 5 minutes while everybody just spoke for a minute, that sort of thing. And I got like 95% of the vote to be class captain. And that teacher loved me from then on. But I was the worst class captain ever. I would be late for class. I would be confused and out of touch, but I could speak, I could do the path, but the leadership component was terrible. And unlike, I don't know about Rolake, about unlike you guys, I didn't become a Christian until much later in adulthood. So my level of leadership and influence, I influenced a lot of people into the wrong path. You know, a lot of people, I influenced them into smoking and drinking and all of those things. You know, I didn't become a Christian until I was, you know, in my 30s, to be fair. You know, so, but however, I will say this, like David, I preached to people that saw me in the club the same year. So when it happened, it was very, very quick, which was very difficult for them to accept. Because I have this picture on my Instagram of me holding a massive bottle of, you know, this alcohol, and in another place holding the microphone and preaching. Those two pictures happened within the space of 2 years, you know. And the thing is, sometimes it takes another person to recognize your leadership potential. Sometimes, and steer you in the right direction. I've been blessed to have people like Pastor Shegun. I've been blessed to have professors like Omid Bitichi and some other great leaders that have been in my life, you know, that have influenced me positively and steered me in the right. They recognize the gift, they just change the direction. And what I want to say is this, you know, in relation to what you were saying, Rolake, and the hate you were getting from the haters, one thing people don't realize is longevity is not a substitute for competence. You know, you hear people saying, I've been there all this while, but that doesn't translate to impact. Some people will be, Jesus Christ, we speak about him, whether a Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, pagan, whatever, his ministry, documented ministry was 3.5 years, tops. But he will forever be in the annals of history and beyond, regardless of what your faith is. So we need to understand that impact is far more significant than longevity in identifying, you know, your leadership potential very early on. What are the things that you're willing to take on and the challenges that you're willing to take on? The person most willing to do the job that other people are not willing to do. You know, that's how I recognize leadership.
Rolake, so the idea was, and I'm sure you got it, that very first encounter or that very first bestowal upon that you realize that, yeah, there is something here, that there is this sense of call to leadership and in your life. I don't know, and I think Izzy mentions that you might have got saved young or whatever, but that story that encourages people who are listening today and realize that, you know, you just didn't drop down on planet Earth with with leadership potential, but yet it was recognized by others, or you started to recognize it yourself.
So thank you for that question. I think for me, well, I got saved when I was 13, but I think because I was quite shy and retiring back then, I didn't really take advantage of opportunities to lead. I think the first time I truly really realized it was in the church. And, you know, just thinking back about how much the church had in developing my leadership skills and my leadership ability. And actually, if you think about it, that should be the perfect environment, right? So, and it was through music, really. So a lot of my leadership traits evolved in the context of worship and music, and, you know, being made music director. And I think what is really interesting about that environment is I was shocked when, you know, when you're called to leadership, there's an element of you that is shocked and surprised. But if we all admit, there also sometimes is an element of us that is like, okay, well, having done this and that, we're also not surprised, but not in an arrogant way.
Yeah.
It's almost like an inner knowing that, well, you know, this was bound to happen because, and I think that part is not because you think you're the best thing since sliced bread, but it's just an inner knowing. And I think that's part of the call, that although it can surprise you, God doesn't leave us totally sometimes in the dark. And there's just a beckoning in our hearts. And usually, and in fact, I remember in the run up to my appointment as music director, I was extremely frustrated I remember that season. I was like, these guys, you need to get your act together. Had all these ideas that I would suggest and propose. And this part about solving problems, God does have a sense of humor because, and so for me, there was a part of, am I the only one seeing these issues and these challenges? And then, hello, bang, we'd like to make you music director. Not because I asked. And I think it's almost like a coming together of the things that are setting you up for that time. And it was a real eye opener because I suddenly realized that it's hard to lead, especially if you're talking about issues based leadership. It's hard to really lead if you're not, like Dr. Isi was saying, there's a discontent around a certain issue that is just the one thing. It's like righteous anger, that one thing that just makes you feel like, oh my goodness, who best to do it than the person who's complaining the most, so long as it's been done constructively. Because as a leader, you also need a positive mindset, because if you don't have a positive mindset, you really cannot push through challenges. So for me, that was the light bulb moment.
Great, that's phenomenal. I've been really enjoying this. I think one of the great things I enjoy about this cohort is how it ministers to me as a person whenever we're speaking. And I really enjoy that immensely. I've got several questions I want to ask. I don't know what order I want to ask them in, and one of them popped up on one of my Covenant brothers sent this to me today, and I found it really extraordinary. And I think it's worth us discussing. Let me read it to you. It says, an extensive study in the USA found that the most productive age in human life is between 60 and 70 years old. The second most productive stage of the human being is from 70 to 80. The third most productive age is from 50 to 60. The average age of Nobel Prize winners is 62 years old. The average age of presidents of prominent companies in the world is 63. The average age of pastor of the 100 largest churches in the USA is 71. And the average age of the Pope is 76. And I found that really interesting. This tells us in a way that it's been best determined that the best years of our life, God permitting, are actually between 60 and 80 years old. And I wanted to read that today because I felt it's important for us. And I think perhaps we can speak into that in terms of our development as leaders. How do you compare how you were as a leader when you were 20, 30, 40 now? And also perhaps to inspire people who are younger in that process of developing as a leader. Because some people, I think we did this a different way the last time when we asked you about that issue of failure in your life. But this time I'm asking about the development, your own development as a leader. I'm sure you're able to look back now, reflect, and be able to speak to people in that way. And this is encouraging for me, who's knocking on some of the big doors of these ages now, that there's, my best, we say it so often, that our best years are ahead of us, but it almost becomes a cliche in a way, rather than us being inspired to realize that, yes, indeed, everything God has invested in us has potential for us fulfilling much more in our latter years. And so I'm going to ask Izzy to start this off.
Oh dear. I was hoping I wasn't starting so I could piggyback on what people say. But yeah, it's the age-old problem. It's the age-old problem. When you're young, you have strength, but you don't have the experience of life, haven't lived through things. When you're older, you have the experience and the wisdom of time and experiences, but you don't have the strength to execute. Now, when we're defining leadership and we're saying leadership is about visioning and influencing people to execute, the reason I'm not surprised by that start, the reason why those people are at that level can be that successful is they have that, they can fall back on experience. I always say this, I put it this way. When I was 20, I was one of those smarty two shoes. I used to, do a lot of research. I thought I was the smartest person in the world. I really, really thought I was wise when I was 20. And when I was 30, I realized my 20-year-old self was foolish. But when I was 30, I really, really believed I was smart. And I was smarter than a lot of people and very wise. Now that I'm in my 40s, just recent 40s, don't get carried away, guys. I recognize that my 30-year-old was foolish. My 30-year-old self is foolish. So wisdom dictates to me is what wisdom dictates to me now is what is foolish about me now? What don't I know that I think I know? So that's when wisdom starts to apply. What don't I know that I think I know? So that's when I now start to become actively wise and start to look for alternatives or answers beyond my frame of reference. Donald Rumsfeld has that famous quote. I don't want to misquote and butcher it now, but it's a famous quote of saying what you know, and what you don't know, and you know what you don't know. But there's also a case of not knowing what you do not know. You don't know. That sort of thing. Someone put it in the chat. You can look it up. So I think that's the key here. It's at this age you start to be deliberate in listening and intentional in saying, hey, what don't I know? What is stopping me right now? What frame of reference do I have that is erroneous? That sort of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
So, well, okay. When did you start to conceive that you did know? If I'm agree, as Issy says.
So I don't think I do know. The more I know, the more I realize I don't know. And I think that applies for a lot of us. But that those quotes and statistics you reeled out are very interesting. I also see that they were very much contextual in the context of these institutions. That is why, when people set up certain types of organizations, they want people with experience. But I think the main difference perhaps is that as you get older, your mortality becomes more glaring. And there is a sense of urgency that then kicks in within you to achieve, to do this, to do that. But I also believe that when you wake up is your morning. We often hear that a lot. But I see people who very late in life are doing amazing things. And, I've just got to a point now where you can't really put a definition, a time on things, because it's really about the appointed time. Now, you can end up living with regret because perhaps you didn't take advantages of opportunity, take advantage of opportunities to lead when you had the chance. But that in itself is part of the leadership lesson. So that story can also be told as an opportunity that was missed, which then enhances your entire experience. And I believe no opportunity is ever wasted. So I think age really is nothing but a number. We say that often. However, there's some things that are better done when we're younger. That's just the reality. Because, most of us on this call have probably lived maybe about half our lives already. Hopefully not quite up to. We all want to live long and prosper. And I think I remember when I turned 40, it was very liberating because on the one hand, I was like, now I'm like, I can truly be myself. I had this whole thing about being myself. And then I wondered, is it that I spent the last 40 years not being myself? But I think these timing milestones are for just us as human beings, a marker of time. To God is at the beginning, he's at the end. He's already in our future. So he sees things. And the way he chooses to work and the appointed time, time is literally irrelevant because he exists outside of it. But I think he's been gracious enough to not leave us sort of wandering in timelessness by giving us intellectual capacity to develop time and chronology so that we're able to plan and order our lives. So it behoves each of us to make the most of seasons and times whilst we gain knowledge, things become clearer to us as we move on. And then the final thing I will say is that leadership is not static. I think your leadership can evolve, and you can decide at this point in my life as a 70-year-old, I want to serve and work with young people. And it opens up a new leadership dimension that would have not been as powerful had you tried to do that in your 30s. So yeah, that's my contribution to that question.
I think that's good. And may I say, I mean, and someone said flattery is like perfume; it ought to be smelt and not swallowed. But I'm gonna just say that you guys are a lot smarter, erudite, astute, and sagacious than I was when I was in my 40s. May I say, you know, and I absolutely
Really?
say
You mean you're not in your 40s?
that.
We have the privilege of following after you.
Yes.
So let's Sarah, would you want to answer that question? And then we're going to do some quick fire questions, one question each. I'm going to get an answer from you all. So, because we, you know, these conversations drag out for us, this cohort, you know.
Just an appreciation of the wisdom that has gone ahead of me about, you know, in regards to that question. I think it's really, really amazing. Those institutions recognizing people, like Rolake did mention, at those ages, I think is just a demonstration of the culmination of leadership, I would say. The recognition of maturity and mastery. The recognition of the combination of maturity and mastery, which is also a combination of many successes and failures of these people who have gone on to make a name for themselves at those, you know, that age, those ages of theirs, in the seasons of their lives. You know, they would have accomplished various things that would make such awards or accolades bestowed on them. But what I don't want us to miss is that combination of mastery and maturity that I think is very powerful. If a younger person is listening to this in their 20s, in their 30s, I'm in my 30s, by the way, I realize I'm the youngest in the room, is to pursue mastery and maturity. At whatever age, it is okay to pursue maturity and mastery. Mastery in that area where you have that unique discontentment, that area that is in alignment with your calling and your life's purpose. When you pursue mastery, you get rid of mediocrity. And when you rid of mediocrity, you begin to command attention and you begin to command authority in that domain. And this is where, of course, the recognition then does come in, and then you get accolades and all of that. But the real essence of pursuing mastery isn't for the accolades. It is to be able to lead with authenticity, where you're not leading comparing yourself with another person, or you're leading as, you know, to use Dr. Izzy's word earlier on, as you know, an adversary. But you see yourself as unique in your own right, as having to bringing something to the table to serve with, you know, that is unique, that is special, that is, you know, that is of mastery. So mastery allows us to lead with authenticity. And then there is the aspect of maturity also that I want to talk about, which is growth, which takes a lot of investment, of failures and successes, of trying things out, of missing things, of reading, of learning, of growing, of mentoring, of being mentored, and so on and so forth. You know, when you get to that age of 50 and 60 and you've been intentional about your mastery and maturity, it is impossible to not be impacting lives enough to gain the recognition of other people. Hence, many names that we mentioned today, the Nelson Mandelas of this world, you know, the Mother Teresa, you would always see that combination of mastery and maturity. There add character as well, because character is that spice that adds longevity to leadership. Without character, leadership is soon cut off.
Thank you so much. I've got one question each for one of you to answer each, you know, and and then we'll do that 1 minute thing where you speak to the people. We're coming to an end. I want to say thank you so much once again. I always enjoy this cohort immensely, and I didn't say that lightly. People who know me know I don't mince my words when it comes to things. If I don't enjoy something, I don't say much about it in that sense. So
Thank you,
thank
sir.
you so very much, and I think people are enjoying it, as you can see. So I've got a question for each one of you. And I think I want to start with Rolake on this, her particular question here, because, watching your life, I see maximize this whole issue of moving from one level of leadership to another. So I want to ask you of um, how do you settle into a new level of leadership? We're talking about the mindset of a leader. And the Bible tells us promotion comes from God. So we need to expect promotion. And we need to expect promotion this year in our lives. And our panel need to expect that in terms of what God's doing in their lives. And so you've been through various levels. You talk about being in the choir, I know, and various, read your profile in various ways. How do you settle into each level of leadership?
Okay, yeah, great question. I think the the mindset is lifelong learning
Mm,
is the biggest principle, and for me, it's always a clean slate. So for me, it's never been there, done that. Ace
mm,
it when I'm going to come into a new level of leadership. It
mm,
is first of all, I'm here to learn. Each chapter that opens is because life is always a series and bucket of
mm,
lessons you put together to create an entire experience. So the first one is really I need to learn something. So I have a mindset of curiosity.
mm,
Continuous learning is absolutely key for a new level of leadership. And then if I were to put it in the faith context, you almost need a fresh anointing for each journey.
mm,
And even though you may know what your purpose is, what your impact, it's really just being able to ask God, what would you have me do and be in this season and in this new chapter? Um, and because the Bible also says, be transforming by the renewing of your minds, it's a daily process. Yes, I did the music director role really well in London, but should I get then appointed to a new music director role here in Nigeria, it's not just going to be a case of cut and paste.
mm,
It is really going to be, who are these people? How would you have me lead them? What is it? What is unique about this environment that I need to understand? And so once having done the spiritual, then you need the strategy. And this book that I really, really love, The First 90 Days, which my husband, gave to me when I started my corporate role 2.5 years ago. I think it's by a guy called Michael Watkins. Fantastic book. And once you've done all that and you said this is a clean slate, then the strategy part comes into being, because that's
mm,
really key for effectiveness. So actually there's a part of it that is always refreshing, but there's a part
mm,
of it where you have a formula. How do you learn in a new environment? And I will give you one clue, an insight into one of my formulas is each time I'm in a new environment, I like to do character studies. I call them character studies. So it's understanding the people and who they are. And that formula
mm.
has actually always worked for me.
Wow.
So part of leadership is not just, yes, you understand that this is a new role, new season, but it's actually realizing there's some things that have worked well for you as well in the past. And it's a way and approach to learning that for me works time and time again, but then
Mm,
obviously takes into account the uniqueness of each different type of situation. But
mm,
ultimately I always have to inquire of the Lord, what would you have me do? Why is this
Mm,
coming at this time? And then marry that with the reality of strategizing and understanding the people in this particular environment or context.
wow. Wonderful. Wonderfully put. Okay. Wonderfully put. Here's your question, Dr. Osagie. Um, it says, give us an example of an opportunity you've maximized in leadership and how you did that.
That's interesting because at the time when you're doing that opportunity or maximizing that opportunity, you don't realize you're maximizing it. But I would say, rather than a specific example, I would say in every facet of my life, um, you have to maximize the opportunity of following, because that is the building block for leadership. So let me give two examples very quickly. I remember when I was doing my PhD, I wanted to go by, my PhD route was never to be in academia. My PhD route was to get enough expertise and competence to go and inform, which I'm doing right now, consult with organizations and consult organizations, not in academia. But a professor of mine said, hey, I think you can teach. It will help you, your funding, it will help, so many things. I think you can teach. And I was like, no, 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 no. I'm not built for the classroom, this, that, and that, and all of that. And he said, no, I really think you should give it a shot. And I said, okay, if I'm going to do it, I'll do it right, and I started teaching. And I remember very early on, one of my first classes was about 500 students. I'm in Scotland. I'm the only Black person. I'm sure you can relate, Dr. Sam. I'm the only Black person teaching Scottish people. It impacted my communication, my preparation skills, all of that understanding. And I was voted, by the time I was leaving, I was voted the best, most innovative lecturer. While other people were complaining about kids having phones, I was integrating their phones into my lectures. All those sort of things. So I didn't know at that time how much influence that will have on me speaking in church or communicating in a meeting. I didn't realize how much that would influence at the time. So it's about maximizing everything you get. It's not just about the how would I say, the seeming great opportunities, because there's something TD Jake says that is fantastic. He said his son had this opportunity, and his son was like, look, I'm going to pour all into this. But how am I going to know if I pour my all into this and I find out this is not the thing? This is not the thing that is for me. What would I do then? And do you know what TD Jake said in all his wisdom? He said, if this is not the thing, this is the thing that will lead to the thing. So every facet of your life is a building block for something more significant. And if you check, just to add to this, if you check, when you go into a room where your incompetence is glaring, dial back and you will find the time where you missed the opportunity to build that competence. So if you get into a room and your incompetence is glaring and you start to self-reflect, dial back and you will see that you missed an opportunity to build competence in that particular area. I hope that helps someone.
And I think that's critical there, because let me bring this question. I think it's only right that if a panelist has been with us from the beginning and writes a question, we deal with it. So I'm going to get Dr. Ekundayo to start it off, and then we can all chip in. We can forfeit that question. I think it's great to do that here. The question is, there's a popular saying that start small but have a big vision. How do you place the balance between pursuing mastery and starting small, Dr. Ekundayo?
A great question, by the way. Oluwatimileyin and Nifalaje, a great question. The truth is, we all have to start, and we all have to start small. And it's not a sin to start small. The only sin is to remain small. And this is why it's very important to have a big vision, to realize that the journey is far, but you've got to start small. And where you start is not necessarily, is not restricting the journey, is not restricting your potential. It's just where you start. When you see someone on the summit of a mountain, they don't get there accidentally. They started from the base and they walk their way to the top. And every single one of us, if we're going to be referred to as masters in any area of life, we have to start small. We have to start by following other people. We have to start by being mentored. We have to start by taking small steps. We have to start by building blocks to get us to that place. So while you have your big vision, you've got to be able to articulate the steps, the small steps, the little tasks, break down the big vision into smaller tasks that would then culminate eventually into that big vision. Let me make this very simple and bring it home. So, for instance, I have a massive vision of building a university in Nigeria. And the goal of the university is to help people discover their purpose so that they can lead based on purpose. All right. I don't have the means to to build a university right now. Okay. However, all right, I have that vision on my left hand. And right now I'm getting my hands dirty, all right, just helping people to discover their purpose and to rise up and lead based on their purpose in my own little way. By starting an institution that is completely virtual at the moment, and we're growing and we're growing and we're growing. Where we started, it was just 40 people that we had as applications. Now we're having thousands of applications. Before you know it, we'll probably be having hundreds of thousands. So it's you have to start small and then you grow. Growth is the key to balancing that big vision plus starting small.
Yeah. Rolake, do you want to jump in on that?
Yes, I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you, Dr. Sam, for that. I think that's really spot on. I would also add that sometimes starting small is a measure of protection for us, because your leadership needs to expand. Your capacity expands as you're tried and tested and you're stretched. And so that's why we shouldn't despise the days of small beginnings, because they can only be for our benefit. There's a reason why it's small now. Perhaps if I had much more now, I would scupper it or do some damage to it. So it's testing ground, it's breeding ground. If you start small, you feel small, right? If it goes wrong, in a sense. And so I think for me, boils down to what Dr. Isi said about every opportunity should not be missed to do something, to harness something, to learn something. And then this part of the question around between pursuing mastery and starting small, I actually think both are complementing each other, because it's in the place of starting small that you pursue mastery. It's like learning to play the piano. I played the sort of children's songs in the early days. And in those early days, I'm learning dexterity, I'm learning finger agility, because I'm playing smaller songs and my fingers are smaller. So it's suited for me at that age. But the values or the discipline of dexterity and agility will also serve me quite well when I start to play Chopin and Mozart and all those bigger pieces. But I learned dexterity and agility when I was playing Old MacDonald Had a Farm. And it's the same principles that are applying at that stage that will apply at the later stage. It's just that now I have a bigger platform and I have a bigger stage, and I'm using a grand piano in a concert hall on that occasion. So for me, mastery actually starts from the little things and then doing them consistently well over time, which then creates opportunities for you to enter your big moments.
Yes.
Fantastic. In fact, when I saw the question, the only thing I literally wrote down is part of the process of mastery is starting small. You develop mastery through the process of becoming where you are going to, in a sense. Thank you all so very much. It's been immense today, as always. Thank you all our viewers across all our platforms. And I'm grateful for our guests tonight, their time, the different time zones you all come from. I appreciate it immensely from you. Stay connected with us as viewers across our social media platforms. You can watch all our programs, past and this one, as we go along. And join us again next month as we continue to examine leadership matters. We're done with our guests tonight, but I want to give them that 1 minute. We're talking about the mindset of a leader, growing, thinking and growing as a leader. And I'm sure they have that one nugget they would like to leave with you in the context of the subject matter today. Dr. Osagie, thank you so very much. You know, we don't take it lightly in coming and being with us all the way from the USA. Would you share with the people?
What I'll say is one thing I'll leave with people. Just maybe piggybacking off the last question. I think we shouldn't be quick to define ourselves. So what I mean by that is a lot of time you might have an erroneous perspective of who you are. Be open to new things. So for example, don't define your vision, even though it's big. Define impact. That's what you have influence over. You don't have influence over the vision. Define impact. Like at every stage in my life, I want to have impact. None of the greatest visionaries that we know today actually saw themselves in that light at the time they started their journey. So it's more about consistently applying myself, be open to new things. I think one of the biggest gifts that you can have as a leader is understanding the intersection between things. So what that means is there's new things coming up online. Read yourself full. Read yourself full. You need, in this day and age where people's attention span is shortening because of the TikTok videos, the Instagram reels, people are literally getting dumber. The person that reads and is able to focus, I tell my kids this every day. The person that reads and is able to focus and communicate what they read will automatically rise to the top. It's just that simple because nobody's reading anymore. Nobody's reading anymore. Yeah. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you so very much. Dr. Sam.
Dr. Easy, how do we recover from today's session? My note is full. I'm learning as well as partaking, learning so much. But to close off, I just want to leave people, with this little thing that leadership starts with discovery and conviction, and that has to happen in the secret place. And to remind them that that it's the problem or the problems and crisis that then beckons or erodes what you've discovered and what you're convinced of about yourself in the secret place. And there are 4 things that I believe every single person should look forward to discover about themselves and be very convinced about. Number 1 is your identity. Who you are. When you settle this matter of identity, you don't compare yourself with anyone. You realize that your journey is different, and you're just focused on who you are. And when you know who you are, you automatically know who you are not, right? And you're not in a race to become everybody or to be like anybody. Okay. Number 2, your purpose. I think it's very, very key to realize that you were born for a reason and that your life has meaning and you're not an accident, and that you have a purpose to fulfill. When that is settled, the hope that makes a leader, that would make a leader stand in the face of adversity and remind people that there's still a future despite the crisis, will be there, would always be there. And number 3, vision. There is something called the vision, and then there are visions. The vision is the revelation of your life's purpose. And then visions are small ideas, or should I say, little ideas that then culminate into the big vision. Both must be taken seriously. And number 4, your potential. I don't necessarily mean your gift and your talent. I mean your potential. To realize that your potential is limitless, that is without bounds, is very powerful. Because then it will remind you when you face Goliath that is not your end. It is just one step on the road or on the journey of leadership that you have to overcome. I will leave you with that. Thank you, Dr. Addison, for this wonderful session.
Thank you very much. Well, okay.
Yeah. So I would just put it to one phrase: don't sweat the small stuff. I think next time you recognize the opportunity to make a difference in a situation, just go ahead, do it. Take the bull by the horns. Sometimes there isn't that formality that someone just comes and appoints you and says you're a leader. And so, sometimes you just have to jump. And closely related to that is the fact that the distractions, the challenges will come. Have your eye on the bigger picture. Why are you leading? That will help push through those difficult and dark days, because as Dr. Addison said, sometimes it can be very lonely at the top. And if you struggle to sort of push through in those moments, just remember why you were called and why you're doing what you're doing. That's it.
Thank you all so very much. This has been immense.
Thank you.
For those of you listening, I'm sure you've been blessed. We can see you've been blessed by your interaction with us today. And we're just going to share a brief word of prayer with you. And let's get the lady to pray today. Rolake, would you pray for help?
Yeah, sure. My teeth is just about holding out.
Oh no.
Yeah, it's been a tough one, but I pushed through.
Thank you so much. I know.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Well done,
Father
Rolake.
Lord, we just thank you for such a great moment to come and just share and deliberate on insights into leadership. Father, we know at the end of the day, you're the one who chooses us, you're the one who calls us, you're the one who equips us, you give us the enabling grace to do what we do and to do it excellently. We thank you for the spirit of excellence that is manifested in each and every one of your children on the call.
Yes.
We thank you because a word has gone out and it will bear fruit. And we can only plant, but you will water and you will multiply. We believe and trust that the one person, the one woman, or the one man that's been on this call that's been searching for answers, we trust that you started a great work of transformation in their lives. And for each and every one of your children that desires to lead or to lead more effectively, I pray for wisdom, I pray for grace, I pray for discovery of self in a way that is positive, that is life-changing. And thank you that we will reconvene at some point in the future to talk about our experiences, to share, and to love on one another. In the mighty name of Jesus, I prayed. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. That's so prophetic, that last bit. God bless you all so very much. Thank you, panel, tonight. Get a good night's rest. I know you're in different time zones. Thank you all so very much. God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.